People are now more connected than at any point in human history, yet millions of adults say making real friends feels harder than ever before. The strange part is that this shift may not be caused by personality at all, but by deep biological systems quietly changing how the brain interprets trust, attention, safety, and connection after 30. Tonight, we explore the hidden science behind adult loneliness, digital overload, emotional survival instincts, and the slow collapse of modern social bonding. Welcome to Relaxing Facts Studio, where complex human behavior becomes clear, measurable, and impossible to stop thinking about. New conversations start to feel heavier after 30, even when nothing visibly changed in daily life. A quick coffee invitation now competes with work schedules, mental fatigue, family obligations, and the growing comfort of familiar routines. The shift feels emotional at first, but the brain changes its priorities long before people notice the behavior itself. Neural systems that once rewarded exploration gradually reduce their sensitivity to social novelty, especially inside the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for long-term decision balancing and behavioral filtering. That filtering becomes stronger with age. Small social uncertainties suddenly feel cognitively expensive. Mental energy starts operating like a limited budget because the adult brain spends more resources predicting outcomes instead of experimenting freely. During early adulthood, dopamine-driven novelty circuits encourage exploration, which helps people rapidly form identities, careers, and relationships. By the mid-30s, those same reward systems begin favoring stability-preserving patterns over uncertain social investments. The brain does not necessarily dislike new people. It simply calculates unfamiliar relationships as higher-effort interactions with unpredictable emotional returns. That calculation happens extremely fast, often before conscious evaluation even begins. Childhood friendships formed through constant forced proximity, where schools, sports, and neighborhoods repeatedly exposed the same people to each other. Adult environments operate differently. Most interactions now occur inside fragmented schedules with fewer repeated encounters, which weakens what psychologists call the mere exposure effect, a mechanism where familiarity increases emotional comfort over time. A modern office may contain hundreds of people, yet many interactions remain brief, task-focused, and digitally interrupted. The brain notices that instability immediately. Familiar people start feeling neurologically safer than potentially rewarding strangers. That preference becomes measurable across large populations. Studies from the American Psychological Association and longitudinal social behavior research show adult friendship networks steadily shrink after the late 20s, especially during career building and parenting years. Meanwhile, cognitive load increases dramatically. The average American adult processes thousands of digital prompts daily, from notifications to work communication systems, forcing attentional prioritization toward predictable emotional environments. In practical terms, maintaining one trusted friendship often consumes less mental energy than initiating 5 new weak social connections. The economy of attention changes everything. Stability begins outperforming exploration at a biological level. That shift creates a hidden psychological loop. The fewer unfamiliar social experiences adults tolerate, the more the brain interprets unfamiliarity itself as emotional friction. Over time, hesitation starts feeling instinctive instead of learned. Researchers studying emotional reward recalibration have observed that familiar relationships activate stronger feelings of safety and recovery than novelty-based interactions in many adults over 30. The result is subtle but powerful. People often stop building new friendships not because connection lost value, but because the brain quietly redefined efficiency as protection. Major life events become strangely quiet in your 30s. A promotion appears in an email instead of a celebration. A breakup happens behind closed doors. Even moving to a new city can unfold without anyone fully witnessing the transition. Earlier stages of life naturally provided built-in observers through schools, universities, roommates, and tightly connected social circles. Adult life removes many of those structures, leaving important milestones psychologically unshared even when other people technically know they happened. That absence changes emotional processing more than most people realize. Human identity develops partly through external confirmation because the brain constantly compares internal experiences against social feedback loops. During adolescence and early adulthood, achievements and failures receive immediate validation from peers, teachers, family systems, and group rituals. By the 30s, many of those synchronized environments disappear. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the decline of social witnessing, where fewer people consistently observe the ongoing narrative of someone's life. Without that reinforcement, major experiences can feel less emotionally anchored, even when objectively meaningful. The event still matters, but the brain receives weaker signals confirming its significance. Digital communication appears to solve that isolation at first because people remain continuously connected through messaging apps, social feeds, and passive online updates. Yet most of those interactions prioritize brief visibility over deep contextual understanding. A photo announcement rarely captures months of uncertainty, stress, or personal transformation behind the event itself. Face-to-face communities once transmitted emotional continuity through repeated physical presence, shared routines, and long-term observation. Modern adult interaction often compresses entire life chapters into short notifications or fragmented updates. The difference becomes psychologically important over time. Information is shared, but lived experience often is not. That pattern now affects millions of adults across high-mobility urban societies. Research from Pew Research Center shows increasing numbers of adults report having fewer close confidants than previous generations, while remote work and geographic relocation continue reducing long-term community stability. At the same time, social comparison systems weaken in adulthood because fewer people move through identical milestones simultaneously. Friends marry at different ages, change careers unpredictably, relocate frequently, or stop sharing personal struggles altogether. Shared timelines begin disappearing. Individual lives become psychologically decentralized. As external validation structures fade, many adults gradually build what psychologists call private meaning systems, internal frameworks that assign importance without relying on collective recognition. That adaptation can increase independence and emotional resilience, but it also changes how loneliness feels. Isolation in adulthood often does not resemble physical solitude. Instead, it emerges as the sensation that important parts of life unfolded without witnesses. Over time, the brain may stop expecting emotional visibility entirely, which quietly reshapes how people connect, celebrate, and even remember their own experiences. The body reacts to prolonged loneliness as if something in the environment remains unsafe. Heart rate patterns shift subtly. Sleep becomes lighter. Small problems feel harder to recover from emotionally. These effects can appear even when someone functions normally at work or maintains occasional social contact. The nervous system does not measure isolation by physical proximity alone. It responds to the perceived absence of stable emotional support, especially during stress regulation and recovery cycles. That perception activates survival biology surprisingly fast. The body begins preparing for threat instead of restoration. Stress hormones stay elevated longer when the brain interprets social isolation as vulnerability. Cortisol, one of the body's primary stress signaling chemicals, normally rises and falls in controlled cycles throughout the day. Chronic loneliness disrupts that rhythm. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology, the field examining interactions between the brain and immune system, show prolonged social disconnection can keep stress pathways partially activated for months or even years. Over time, the body reallocates energy toward vigilance instead of long-term maintenance and repair. The effect is gradual. Most people never notice the biological shift while it develops. Short periods of solitude can improve recovery, focus, and emotional regulation because voluntary isolation feels psychologically different from persistent disconnection. The body distinguishes between chosen solitude and perceived abandonment. In supportive social environments, the nervous system receives stabilizing signals through conversation, eye contact, vocal tone, and physical presence. Researchers call this process co-regulation, where human interaction helps reduce physiological stress activation. Digital communication weakens many of those sensory inputs, especially touch, synchronized attention, and environmental presence. The brain still receives information online, but the body receives fewer calming biological signals. The long-term effects extend far beyond mood alone. Research from National Institutes of Health links chronic loneliness with increased inflammation markers, disrupted immune response, cardiovascular strain, and measurable changes in sleep architecture. Deep sleep stages often become fragmented under persistent social stress, reducing memory consolidation and hormonal recovery overnight. Some longitudinal studies have also connected prolonged isolation with accelerated cellular aging through shortened telomeres, protective structures attached to chromosomes that gradually deteriorate under chronic physiological strain. The scale becomes difficult to ignore. Loneliness affects systems operating inside nearly every organ in the body. That biological pressure creates a feedback loop many adults misinterpret as personal weakness. Exhaustion reduces motivation to socialize. Reduced socialization increases perceived isolation, and the nervous system reinforces defensive behaviors designed to conserve energy. Over time, the body can begin treating ordinary social uncertainty as additional stress exposure instead of potential relief. Researchers increasingly describe chronic loneliness not as a temporary emotion, but as a whole-body regulatory state capable of reshaping immunity, sleep, cognition, and long-term health simultaneously. A phone can simulate social activity for hours without producing the feeling of genuine connection. Notifications arrive constantly, conversations remain partially active all day, and social feeds create the impression of continuous human presence. Yet many adults report feeling emotionally undernourished immediately after long periods online. The brain receives repeated signals of interaction, but the body experiences very little real-world social engagement through shared space, touch, eye contact, or synchronized attention. That mismatch changes social behavior gradually. Most people adapt before they recognize the neurological shift. Fast digital interaction fragments the brain's reward system into short stimulation cycles. Every notification, message preview, or social update produces a small anticipatory dopamine response, the same motivational chemical involved in novelty detection and behavioral reinforcement. Instead of sustaining attention through deep conversation, the brain begins optimizing for rapid emotional sampling across dozens of micro-interactions. Neuroscientists sometimes describe this as attentional fragmentation, where cognitive focus repeatedly resets before emotional depth fully develops. The process feels efficient at first, but shallow engagement consumes time once reserved for stronger social bonding. Face-to-face interaction activates far more sensory systems simultaneously than digital communication ever can. Human conversation normally combines vocal tone, posture, breathing rhythm, facial movement, environmental awareness, and subtle physical synchronization between nervous systems. Researchers studying social neuroscience call this multisensory integration, a process that helps regulate trust, emotional prediction, and psychological safety. Online interaction removes many of those stabilizing signals while still delivering enough stimulation to create temporary feelings of connection. The brain interprets activity as social fulfillment. The nervous system often disagrees. The effect now operates across entire populations connected almost continuously through digital infrastructure. Research from Meta platforms, smartphone usage studies, and behavioral attention research show many adults check digital devices hundreds of times daily, often interrupting in-person interaction within seconds. At the same time, average attention spans during uninterrupted conversation continue shrinking in high notification environments. Even brief social pauses increasingly trigger reflexive screen-checking behavior, especially during moments previously filled by silence, observation, or spontaneous dialogue. Continuous stimulation changes emotional expectations. Stillness itself can begin feeling uncomfortable. As digital exposure intensifies, the brain may gradually reduce its sensitivity to the slower rewards of physical friendship. Deep relationships develop through repetition, patience, and sustained shared experiences, processes that operate far below the speed of modern platforms. Over time, Constant low-level online interaction can create what psychologists describe as false social saturation, where people feel socially full, despite limited emotional closeness. The result is subtle but powerful. Many adults stop seeking physical connection not because the need disappeared, but because digital systems continuously imitate enough social contact to suppress the instinct temporarily. Modern adults move between social environments faster than previous generations ever did. Jobs change cities. Rent prices reshape neighborhoods. Online communities appear overnight and disappear just as quickly. Many friendships now exist across fragmented schedules, multiple apps, and temporary geographic overlap instead of stable physical communities. The result feels flexible on the surface, but the brain evolved inside small groups where familiar people remained physically present for years at a time. That difference matters biologically. Human attachment systems developed around continuity, not constant social turnover. Emotional security depends heavily on predictable social patterns because the nervous system continuously tracks relational stability in the background. Earlier human communities operated through repeated in-person rituals such as shared meals, cooperative labor, seasonal gatherings, and synchronized daily routines. Those behaviors reinforced what psychologists call attachment security, a state where social belonging feels reliable and emotionally accessible. In modern urban environments, many adult relationships operate without those stabilizing repetitions, especially when work mobility and digital communication replace long-term communal presence. The brain adapts to that uncertainty slowly. Trust becomes more conditional and emotionally cautious over time. Online networks expanded the number of possible social connections dramatically, yet they weakened many structures that once maintained durable group identity. Traditional communities often depended on physical interdependence because neighbors shared resources, protection, childcare, transportation, and local responsibilities. Digital social systems prioritize access instead of permanence. A person can now interact with hundreds of people daily while remaining largely disconnected from immediate physical communities. Researchers studying social cohesion increasingly distinguish between connectivity and embeddedness, because constant communication does not necessarily produce lasting emotional support. The distinction becomes visible during stress. Broad networks often provide information quickly but stability much more slowly. By 2026, large urban populations across countries like the United States, Japan, and the United Kingdom show rising rates of single-person households, delayed marriage, geographic mobility, and reduced participation in local organizations. Research from Harvard University and long-term social behavior studies indicate many adults now maintain fewer deeply integrated community ties than earlier generations did at the same age. Meanwhile, algorithm-driven platforms continuously reorganize social exposure around interest similarity instead of long-term cooperative bonding. Communities become easier to enter. They also become easier to leave. As tribal structures weaken, adult attachment increasingly shifts from collective identity toward individualized emotional survival. Many people unconsciously begin treating relationships as temporary, even when they desire permanence. That expectation subtly changes vulnerability, trust formation, and conflict tolerance inside adult friendships. Researchers studying attachment insecurity have observed that unstable social environments can increase hyper-independence, emotional withdrawal, and defensive self-reliance over time. The modern world offers unprecedented social access, yet the brain still searches for something older. A predictable group that remains present long enough to feel biologically safe. Modern loneliness rarely arrives as complete isolation. More often, it emerges quietly through overloaded attention, unstable routines, weakened communities, and biological systems still searching for the kind of connection humans evolved to depend on. Understanding that pattern matters because recognizing the mechanism is often the first step toward changing it. Thank you for watching Relaxing Facts Studio. If you are not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe for more deep documentary episodes like this one. Share this video on your social media pages, leave a like to help more people discover the channel, and write a comment below with your thoughts and insights from today's episode. Your support is what keeps this channel growing and continuing forward.